Good morning and welcome. My name is Bent Myllerup and I'm part of Better Change. And Better Change is an international group around 20 change agents. We're spread across Europe, South Africa and North America as well. And I have been working with leadership in various settings for a little over 20 years now. And one of my primary focus has always been organizational culture. So I'm really looking forward into diving into this topic with you all today here. But we're going to talk about organizational culture, which I think is the overlooked key to success with new ways of working. And first I'll give you a quick intro to why I decided to create this webinar. This is the second time I'm doing it. I have done it in Danish a few months ago. And after sharing my motivation for doing this webinar, I'll share some perspectives on organizational culture. And this is with a focus on leadership behavior. So I'll introduce also a recognized method in visualizing your organizational cultural profile. It's called the Competing Values Framework. And finally, I'll discuss a particular approach to working with cultural change. So this webinar here is not especially about Agile, but it's inspired by me working years and years in Agile environments, and also the recent discussions about where either Agile is dead or not. So let's just briefly address Agile. So here is how it originally was intended to be: 4 values and 12 principles, and they're not meant to be strict guidelines to follow. They're more like a guiding framework for organizations primarily working in product development. And all these 4 values, they have a left side and a right side. And they're both important, but as it's also stated here in the Agile Manifesto, and I'm sure you know this, the left side is valued over the right side. But unfortunately, during the implementation of various frameworks, the focus has, at least to my experience, often been more on the right side of the values than the left side. And why is that? Well, maybe that's because it's easier to handle the right side than the left side. Or maybe it's because it gives consultants a chance to create a delivery plan and with payments attached to that delivery plan so that they can claim that they have delivered and then send an invoice. Who knows? While parts of the right side can contribute to shaping culture, it's primarily the left side of the manifesto that relates to culture. So the right side must be in order, but it's on the left side that the magic actually is. And this is what we're going to dig deeper into here during this webinar. So my point is that the lack of focus on culture has led to mediocre results and a lack of success with implementing Agile methods. So understandable, the market is frustrated, and in some areas we have even seen a shift away from Agile approaches back to more linear approaches. So Agile is dead, many says, and often those who are shouting loudest about that's the one who never truly experienced what Agile is, because they have most likely, this is a claim from my side, has been experiencing Agile on the right side of the Agile Manifesto. But that's a long discussion, and I don't want to go deeper into that discussion. I have, especially last year, been writing a series of blog posts as a grumpy old man. And if you're interested in that, well, you can go to our website and you can see these. Yeah. So let's move on with today's topic, which is organizational culture. So what is culture? Well, culture is like the weather. So there's always culture present, just like there's always weather inside the atmosphere of Earth. Culture that change over time, just like the weathers do over time. We just talked about the sunny weather we have here, at least here in Aarhus, where I'm located. Yeah. Everyone talks about culture, but very few are actively doing something about it. Again, just like the weather. So let's dive into what culture is. So organizational culture is about our behavior as a group of people. Practically speaking, it's about what we think, how we talk, and the way things get done around here. So this suggests, as mentioned before, that culture is changeable. It depends on context, relationship, and what we are carrying with us in our mental backpack. So what we bring with us. Edgar Schein, who is one of the great thinkers on organizational culture, Edgar Schein is known for saying that leadership and culture are two sides of the same coin. With this, he is expressing a deep connection between leadership, behavior, and culture. We'll come back to that, but let's just clarify here that I distinguish between being a manager and being a leader. So a manager or a boss is a position you can achieve in the organization. A leader is more something that you become if people choose to follow you. So I hope there's leadership on all levels in your organization, formal and informal. In a complex and changing world, that's my claim, the need for managers to provide leadership is essential. Unfortunately, during my work, I've met many managers who are not leaders. They're just managers. And to be honest, I think that's a shame because it is impeding the organization. So Edgar Schein, he also talks about the different layers of organizational culture. It's often illustrated with the metaphor of an iceberg. So at the top, the 10% about the surface, that's the artifacts of the organization. These are things like our logo, how the office is laid out, the dress code, the fleet of company cars, how we talk to each other, and our ceremonies like celebrating anniversaries. So these artifacts, they are reflections of our culture. And as a newcomer, you automatically interpret the culture based on what you see. You might be right or you might be wrong. It's important to gain a deep understanding over time of what these artifacts means to the organization, because your interpretation, well, it might be wrong as you start. It's when you get the deeper understanding, you begin to understand what the artifacts actually mean to the organization. Just below the surface are the values of the organization. So they are primary values that we are striving to live by. We probably have an artifact or two where these as inspirational values are stated. And values, they are fundamental to us as humans. We all have our personal values, which are created through socialization. So our interaction with other people. It can happen by adapting to existing group norms, or it can be happening by rebellion against them. For example, my personal values are formed, to begin with, that I grew up in rural Denmark in a strictly religious family. And in my family, there was definitely things we couldn't do. So my personal values had a starting point by adapting some of these values, but also rebellion against them. For example, when I was a young man, 16, 17 years old, my mother thought that I was suffering from migraine because I often had a headache. But it was usually Saturday and Sunday I had a headache, and my mother didn't realize that alcohol was part of why I had a headache, right? Because I went to Scout on a Friday evening. Yes, I went to Scout, but the bar was also open now otherwise, right? So my personal values is an adaptation of that and also rebellion. And then since I moved here to Aarhus, the second largest city in Denmark, and met other kind of people and also been working in the environment of Asia the last 20 years, that has also formed my values. So generally people strive to live by their values. If you act against your own values, you are in conflict with yourself, and this often leads to the feeling of guilt, frustration, or maybe even burnout. So I had a burnout more than 20 years ago, and seen in the retrospect, it was a lot about that the role I played back then as a project manager in a company, I was actually in contrast with my personal values, with the way I was supposed to act as a project manager. So in general, values comes from what has proven to work for us, but as Ralph Stacey would say, they are also constantly up for negotiation. We'll get back to Ralph Stacey a little later here. Often, conflicts arise due to conflicting values. Conflicts can also occur because we have different interpretations of the values that we generally have agreed on, how we are living those. So we have different ways of living those values, which can also lead to this conflict. So our values, they influence our artifacts, and our artifacts, they also influence our values. As an example here, there's definitely a reason why your company logo looks the way it looks. Seen from myself, it's not by chance or coincidence that the logo of Better Change is an imperfect green circle, because it's in some way reflecting our values and therefore also our culture in our organization. At the bottom, at the base of the iceberg, here we have the basic underlying assumptions. So these reflect what the members of the organization, especially the managers and leaders, what they really think, how they really talk, and how they act when it comes down to it. And these, you could say, are the values we actually are living by. So the basic underlying assumptions, they influence our values, and our values influence these assumptions. And here, fundamentally, that's the negotiation of values that I mentioned before, that Ralph Stacey he talks about. The problem is that in many organizations, there is a gap between the values we claim to have and the values we are actually living by. The bigger the gap, the worse it is. If managers say one thing but do another thing themselves, then they fail as role models. And this is causing confusion, skepticism, sarcasm, fear, and ultimately the people who can leave, they will leave the organization. So among other things, working with the culture involves reducing the gap between our claimed values and our underlying assumptions. So that's the perspective of culture and the layers of culture, according to Edgar Schein. So, can organizational culture be measured? That's the question. Well, you can't precisely measure organizational culture. As I mentioned before, organizational culture is changeable because values are constantly being negotiated. So there's no way you can stick a probe into an organization and get an exact measurement of the culture. But you can get an indication, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So a recognized model for indicating the culture of an organization is the Competing Values Framework by Cameron and Quinn. And this model describes the organization's culture profile along two dimensions. Horizontally, this is describing the degree to which the organization has an internal or an external focus. Or you could also say where either it's concerned with the present or with possibilities out in the future. On the vertical axis, this is the degree to which the organization demands flexibility or stability. Or you could also say where either it's focusing on people or is it focusing on systems. So these two dimensions, that create 4 quadrants, and using an organizational cultural assessment instrument, very nice name, you can ask a representative group of the organization's member to evaluate the existing culture. When you do this, it's important to remember that culture is changeable, as I said a couple of times, and the responses you get depends on the current mood and what respondents have recently experienced as members of the organization. There'll also be a variation from team to team, from department to department, and depending on in which level of the organization each respondent is. So let's take a closer look at this model here. So the first quadrant I'm going to explain here, that indicates to which the organization have an external and a flexible perspective. And this quadrant here we call create. In the original form, or the original form of the model, it was called the ad hoc. So organizations that are strong in this quadrant are usually driven by values such as being visionary, being innovative, and creating new ideas, maybe even disrupting the market. Doing whatever it takes to achieve their vision is also part of this, even as time is short, money is tight, and resources are limited. So, typical archetype for organizations strong in this quadrant, that's startup companies. The second quadrant describes organizations that also have a flexible but internal perspectives, and this we call collaborate. In the original form, it was called clan. Some people also refer to it as the family quadrant. And organizations that are strong in this quadrant are usually driven by values such as developing people and strengthening teamwork, ensuring everybody have their voice out through inclusion and participation, seeking consensus in decision making. And typical archetypes of organizations strong in this quadrant are NGOs, or organizations who are primarily focused on people and their development and well-being. The third quadrant includes organizations that have an internal perspective and seek stability. And this quadrant is called control, and that's the name it always have had. And organizations that are strong in this quadrant are usually driven by values like ensuring everything runs smoothly, and the result is in the right conditions. So process-driven, compliance, zero defect culture, and so on. And typical archetypes for organizations strong in this quadrant are those working in regulated areas. This can include manufacturing, pharmaceutical companies, banks, airlines, I hope, and so on. And finally, the last quadrant, here we have organizations that demand stability, but also have an external perspective, and this quadrant is called compete. In the original form of the model, it was called the market. And organizations that are strong in this quadrant are usually driven by values such as achieving results through actions, gaining market share, beating their competitors. Typical archetypes for organizations strong in this quadrant are those involved in sales, marketing, and so on. So each organization should have elements from each of these quadrants, and you are only as strong as your weakest area. But based on what you want to achieve, the balance between these parts will differ and likely also change over time. This model is based on competing values, so there are tensions between its opposite quadrants. So for example, the tension between control and create is about innovation. While create seeks breakthroughs and disruption, control prefers incremental steps with a solid foundation before moving to the next stage. There's often conflicts between different functions in a company due to this point, because employees who are primarily based in control will find it overwhelming what employees based in create want to do. And looking the other way, create employees will feel met with a rigid approach from the employees based in control. The tension between collaborate and compete is about speed or is about pace, while collaborate wants everyone involved and prefer consensus. Compete values actions over talk. Talk is cheap, you know. Employees based in compete will feel their counterparts are slow and sluggish, while the experience from the other side feels rushed and maybe even superficial. So as mentioned, you need a bit of every quadrant, and you're only as strong as your weakest point. So through a survey with responses from a representative group of employees, as we talked about before, you can create a profile that indicates the organizational culture. So remember, it's not a precise measure, as I shared before. It is the current mood and the recent experiences that will influence these responses. And additionally, there'll also be difference in how individual employees experience the culture, which may also reflect local subcultures. So therefore, the results should be taken with more than a grain of salt. It can help with understanding and accepting the results of this survey if the responders also contribute with illustrative stories, so that can serve as evidence of the existing culture. There isn't one profile that's absolutely correct if you want to succeed with agile approaches. But if we look at the illustrated profile that I have here and map the values from the Agile Manifesto into it, we can see that the organizations behind this profile, which primarily has a control culture, we would call it, that mostly prefer the right side of the manifesto. So process and tools, comprehensive documentation, contract negotiation, and following a plan. So the profile may cover many aspects, but leaders in an organization with such a profile should probably work on shifting the center of mass in this profile towards create, while maintaining their strength in collaborate and compete. And of course, the question is, how do you do this? And this is what we will address here in the final part of this webinar. So, how can cultural change be addressed? Well, the bad news is there's no single recipe that guarantees a desired result. And this is due to the extreme complexity found in organizational dynamics. So, Ralph Stacey, who we had talked about earlier, he worked with complexity in human interaction, and he might be known for Stacey's matrix, which actually is a model that he kind of deprecated himself, but it's still a good model to explain things. Instead, he developed a theory called complex responsive processes. And this is a theory that describes basic social life in organizations. So the following metaphor can help us understand the theory. When starlings, they are forming flocks and form murmurations, as it's called, is primarily due to the presence of a predator. So this is a survival technique or survival mechanism. So when starlings form patterns, it's not because a chief executive bird commands how the other birds should fly. It's each bird who makes its own decisions about how to fly. So we don't know exactly how they decide that, because we never interviewed a bird about this. But simulations of the phenomenon shows that each bird most likely are using 3 simple rules. The first rule is, I would like to fly with a constant distance to the surrounding birds. Rule number 2, which is a consequence of the first, I'll fly with a constant speed relatively to the surrounding birds. And the rule number 3 is, I'm seeking to go to the center of the flock because that's the safest place. So murmurations is actually the result of interaction between the individual birds and their intentions to survive. So if we translate this into organizations, the lesson is that managers and leaders can define all the strategies they want, and they can make all the plans they find necessary. But what happens because human beings are doing what makes sense to them. So it's the individual's understanding of what we're trying to achieve, and also the personal intentions regarding this. So I would claim control is an illusion when it comes to human behavior. So returning to the metaphor, when we observe a murmuration, we can recognize patterns. That's probably what makes this phenomenon so captivating for us as human beings. But no matter how intensely we observe the starling flock, we will never be able to predict the next pattern. So translated that to organization, that means that even if a particular leadership intervention triggered a successful result, it's not certain that a similar intervention will create a similar result another time, not even with the same people in the same context. So this whole idea about that once we have experimented, we found a successful result with that when we are talking about organizational culture, now we could just roll out, you can't. Working with cultural change is a continuous sequence of experiments, and there's no guarantee for a given result. So what do you do? Ta-da! Well, a plausible approach to cultural change include the following steps here. Well, first of all, we need to understand the existing culture, and that can be done through surveys, as we talked about just before. Next is to determine the necessary culture, and that should be based on the strategy of the company. Clarifying what the cultural change will and will not mean, because that makes it easier to communicate. Describe illustrative stories for the desired culture, because that can be used as inspiration. It can also be used for beginning to have set up metrics. Identify and plan initiatives that can promote the desired culture, and then follow up, reflect, and adjust the initiatives. And you have to remember, communicate clearly, explicitly, continuously along the way. The 3 C's of change management: communicate, communicate, communicate. So we already addressed the first point quite a bit in this webinar. So let's focus on the final part of the webinar, on the remaining points. So based on the organization strategy, where do you want to position yourself in the market? What do you want to achieve? And so on. You need to decide which profile is most appropriate for the organizational culture. And please note here that some assessments, they actually also ask the responders what the desired culture should be. If you're using that approach, then have an awareness of that the challenge is that usually will give a picture of a convenient culture. And that is not necessarily the same as the culture that is actually needed. The desired culture should therefore be, as a starting point, defined by the strategy of the organization. So in the example shown here, the fully drawn line represents the trend for the existing culture in an organization that primarily consists of independent consultants. Wonder who that organization should be? Well, there's a logo of the organization at the same slide here. The dotted line shows the profile of the desired culture, at least from my perspective. You of course need to reach agreement on what the desired culture should be. With a clarification of the existing culture and the desirable culture, then the next steps is to find a common understanding of what this cultural change will mean and what it will not mean. So here the conversation is more important than documentation, I would say. But a shared vision must naturally be maintained so it can be communicated and serve as the basis for further process and progress. So in the example shown here, the goal is to strengthen the create culture and, among other things, achieve that more of the organization's members contribute to the development of the organization's product and service catalog. There's also a desire to strengthen the compete culture and achieve greater discipline and action in the sales process. And finally, the aim is to strengthen the control culture and achieve a more uniform structure and use of common tools. So without this necessarily being a zero-sum game, this will change in the culture. The existing strong collaborating culture will be impact. So the goal is to maintain the strong sense of community, but maybe be some difficult conversations that we need to have because the feeling of a family might stand in a way of this in this particular organization here. So what will the culture change mean and not mean needs to be exemplified. With a shared understanding of what the cultural change entails, the next step is to write illustrative stories about the desired culture. And these illustrative stories, for me, it's fine. They can be a bit looser in the formulation, but they are examples of what the future culture would be. And I've chosen here to use a format that is inspired by Dave Marquette, a former nuclear submarine captain. He wrote a really good book called Turn Around the Ship. So, conversation about the future culture is important because these stories serve as inspiration for us to change our behavior. And as I shared earlier on, these stories also provide input on which initiatives we can launch and how we should use metrics to assess progress. The culture promoting initiatives can be of very kinds, depending on what we want to achieve. However, there are some typical areas of effort that can be partly interesting to address. Leadership behavior. Remember Egershein's point about leadership and culture being two sides of the same coin. Maiken Schultz, who is a professor at Copenhagen Business School, she's also the chairman of the Carlsberg Foundation here in Denmark. She goes as far as saying that the only guaranteed way to shape culture is through leadership behavior. Structure is also strong in shaping culture. This includes how we are organized, how we contribute or how we conduct our meetings, the layout of our workplace, etc. And this can contribute to maintaining or changing the culture. If we want to have a well-functioning, self-organized team, well, if office layout is preventing them for collaboration, then we have to change the office setup. Policies. Perhaps there are rules and procedures that keeps us doing what we used to. Maybe changing those policies couldn't contribute to a cultural change. And then finally, metrics. You get what you measure. So make sure your metrics contribute to the change you desire and they're not counterproductive for what you want to desire. So there's not just one right tool to use for culture promoting initiatives. The most important thing is a shared understanding, shared actions, persistence, and discipline. Here at Better Change, we have developed a tool called the Plausibility Canvas. And the name embraces the complexity of organizational dynamics, as well as the recognition that people always do what makes sense to them, and that they act from good intentions as a starting point. So using an approach for that, and you get access to this after the webinar if you want to try it out. It also includes hypothesis making along with envisioning the possibilities that the desired future culture will give us. From that, we're discussing what are the plausible steps we can take and what will we specifically do to achieve that. So as mentioned, it's important to understand that working with cultural change is not a linear process. As always, when we work with complex issues, which Agile was created to address, we must work in iterations of planning, executing, following up, and corrective actions. Plan, do, study, act. That might sound familiar to some of you. And that was basically what I had planned to share. So I hope this has been inspiring for your work with cultural change. And if you leave here with an understanding that the work is complex and unpredictable, but there are steps you can take, and especially that leadership behavior is essential in shaping culture, then I hope the last 45 minutes has not been completely wasted for you. Yeah. And if you have any further questions, you're also more than welcome to reach out to me or some of my colleagues at Better Change.